Okay, hello everyone. I'm going to get the class started now. And if you could just let me know in the chats whether or not you can hear me just fine, I would greatly appreciate that. All right, sounds like everybody can hear me. So welcome to this class. This is our second class of the cooking portion of our Zoom classes. This is Tea 101, Drinking and Cooking with Tea. So I hope that you all like tea as much as I do. I have certainly drank more than my fair share of tea over the last several days getting ready for this class. In fact, there are still several cups of tea cooling sitting in my living room. So just before we get started, if classes doing me talking to you about things and showing some demo style videos where I will be describing what is happening in the cooking portion. So we're not going to cook live together because that would take quite a long time because we have more than a few recipes to get through. So that is the style of the class. If you can please keep your camera and your microphone turned off throughout this class, that would be wonderful, but certainly feel free to use the chat. If you have any technical difficulties, please let me know in the chat. I am certainly not a Zoom expert, and this is only the second Zoom class that I've hosted, so I will try my best to help you, but no promises. If you have any questions, definitely use the chat to ask them. I'm going to be taking periodic breaks to answer any questions that come in. So that's one of the great benefits of taking these classes live is that you can ask questions. You can always email me questions as well, but it is nice to get them in time. If you're disconnected at any point, you should be able to log back into the class using the link that you received in the email, or the one that you used to get into this chat, into this class in the first place. And I will let you back in. If I lose my connection, which honestly is seeming like a real possibility because my internet has been being rather difficult this afternoon. If that should happen, I will be back as soon as possible. I hope that I have my rig set up here so that you won't be booted out of the class if I get disconnected. If you are though, give it 10 minutes and then use the link again and I will try to be back up and running. This class is being recorded though, hopefully. So it will be up on our YouTube channel tomorrow. For you to either rewatch, or if you are disconnected at some point, you can catch up from where you left off, or you can share it with your friends and family. So that'll be on our YouTube channel and actually up on our website. And if you missed the last class or wanted to watch it again, it was successfully recorded and it is on our YouTube channel and on our website. So you should definitely check that out if you didn't already see it. And this is just our second class, so as always, please be patient and let us know if there's anything we can do to improve these classes. You can contact me at any point at marketing@bluehill.coop with any suggestions that you have. And I'm not sure if I'm getting a little bit of a lag on my slides here. I'll try to pay attention to that. I have two screens running here. So just a little introduction if you do not know me already. My name is Kip Sienna Hopkins and I'm the marketing manager at the Blue Hill Co-op. I'm also a blogger, a Japan enthusiast, and occasional importer of Japanese tea and teaware. So what I mean by occasional is that I used to run a gallery on Main Street in Blue Hill with my sister, and I imported Japanese tea and teaware there. We had to close down because of COVID-19. So I am currently on hiatus from that particular aspect of my interest, but possibly getting back into that in the future. So I import tea from a tea business out of just outside of Kyoto in a town called Wazuka, and they're a family-run business with several farms. So that is my line of expertise would be Japanese tea, but we are going to be covering all kinds of different tea in this class. And just a brief thing about my blog, it's Washoku Day, and it is a blog about Japanese food and culture. And we cover some different things. Just me. I cover some different things in the blog. Mostly, I talk about my experience with Japanese cuisine, cooking it, learning about it. I give lots of food information. We occasionally do some recipes. Recently, we've actually been doing a lot of keto variations on Japanese recipes, so those are pretty fun. And we also do cultural exploration and Japanese history on there. So it's definitely worth a read if you are interested in Japanese food and culture. And also that last class that we did, Japanese basics of Japanese cooking, is also a good place to look if you're interested in the subject. Oh, also just a note about myself, I am not a nutritionist, so at one point I do give some information about health benefits of tea, and I want you to take that with a grain of salt and know that I'm not an expert in such things. So certainly if it's something that interests you, look into it on your own, and certainly consult with your health physician if you are making any big changes in your diet and such. So getting started with our first slide here. What is tea? So tea is a beverage made from the cured or fresh leaves of the Camellia sinensis, which is an evergreen shrub from East Asia. So it is all different kinds of tea are all from the same plant. And herbal teas, of course, are not actually teas. They're called that for lack of a better word, but they are in fact herbal brews. But tea itself is the most popular beverage in the world, aside from water, of course, which really is more abundant, I suppose. But tea is also a naturally caffeinated thing, so it is a natural stimulant, making it quite enjoyable in that way. There are multiple varieties of tea, known as black tea, green tea, white tea, oolong, and guar. Categories of tea all come from the same two, and the different kinds of tea are from changes in the processing and in how much oxidation happens during that processing, which changes the flavor and the color and the qualities of the tea. But there are variations to each of those types as well, from different degrees of flavor or strongness, all kinds of different things within those categories. So it's really a broad subject of interest, and if it's a type of drink that you enjoy, you can certainly find plenty of material to tickle your fancy. So the history of tea. I'm looking to my slide. Are you guys seeing the history of tea, or are you saying what is tea? Oh no, my internet connection is unstable. Okay, history of tea. Okay, so just before I get into the history of tea, I want to give you a warning that a lot of it is to do with China, and I am not an expert in Chinese history, and my pronunciations are certainly lacking in that department. So please do not be offended if my pronunciations are garbage. But tea originated, they believe, as a medicinal beverage in the Yunnan region of China. And according to legend, it was invented by Shen Hong, the agricultural deity. Though it was first used for medicine, its own sake, recreate, but developed different processing. So, for instance, they discovered how to, during the Yuan dynasty, which was in the 1500s, and they discovered how to pan fry and roll leaves so that they maintained their green color, which is what brings us green tea. So lots of development was made in tea over the centuries. Tea was brought to Japan in the 9th century, and he brought seeds to Japan, but it wasn't until the Zen monk Eisei went and traveled across China, learning different cultivation techniques and about the health benefits. He wrote a 2-volume book about it. This was in the 1200s. And he brought all that knowledge back to Japan and began growing the highest quality teas in Japan. He also introduced powdered teas, which eventually led to the development of the tea ceremony in Japan, which is certainly still well known today. He's also responsible for introducing tea to Shogun Minamoto no Sanetomo, who started the samurai drinking it and brought that tea appreciation to the samurai class, and from there it spread to all different social levels in Japan. And now, moving to the history of tea in the West, it's a very broad subject that has, I mean, all of it is a broad subject, obviously, but the story of how Britain ended up getting into the tea industry is one that I'll be recommending. A book of subject interests you, but I'm just going to briefly summarize that. Tea was introduced to the West in the 16th century. The Dutch, I believe, Britain. And Britain did not care the whole industry, so they spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out how to grow tea themselves. China was very secretive about the methods, so it took quite a bit of finagling in order to essentially steal the secrets of tea production. And they ended up succeeding in the 1800s and setting up tea farms in the colonies that they had in India, which is where we get Darjeeling and Assam. And it really changed the whole tea industry. But there was quite a lot of backstabbing and secrecy and disguises and all kinds of fun things like that during the process. So certainly it's an interesting story. But moving on. So as far as the health benefits of tea, just a moment, let my slide catch up. The health benefits of tea. Tea is sometimes called the healthiest drink in the world. It's packed with antioxidants, which are of course wonderful for many different things. Tea has of course been used medicinally in China and Japan and other countries for centuries. So there's certainly a lot of folk practice in the use of tea for medicinal purposes. Studies in the West, in our more scientific modern fashion, have only just, well, not just in the West actually, studies in Asia as well. They've just started going with those, and there are some interesting conclusions that they're starting to draw that seem to back up tea as being a healthy thing for you to add into your diet. Of course, nothing's proven yet, but some interesting indications for green tea certainly are things like a reduction in the risks of developing certain cancers, lowering blood sugar levels, improving cardiovascular health, improving concentration and your mood and memory. There's a particular amino acid in it called L-theanine, which has been shown to relax you without making you drowsy. So it's a lovely thing for mindfulness. And it's also showing possible indications of lowering the risk of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And it's also been shown to help burn fat and speed up your metabolism. So there's some interesting health benefits, possible health benefits to tea. So I'm going to move on and talk about the different types of tea that we mentioned earlier, starting with green tea. So green tea is tea that is unwilted and unoxidized. As we mentioned before, it is able to retain the green color of the stems of the leaves because of the way that it is processed. It is the most studied tea for health benefits, as mentioned before. It also has the lowest level of caffeine, roughly 25 milligrams per cup, though matcha has a bit more, making it lower than coffee, which I think has around 100 milligrams per cup or something like that. So that's nice. Green tea is traditionally served without sweetener or milk. So a lot of the time in America, when you buy iced tea here, it is sweetened, even if it is made with green tea. But in the world over, it is generally accepted that green tea is not to be sweetened. And in fact, when I was in Japan, all of the green tea that I had, well, all teas actually, is that you have to be careful about how long you steep them and the temperature of the water, because it can greatly change the flavor of the tea. So for instance, if you use too hot of water or you steep it for too long, you can get a much more bitter and astringent version of your tea. So it's good to pay attention to that. And I will be giving various times for brewing tea with in the upcoming slides here, but for the temperature of the water for green tea, I say that it's a pretty good rule of thumb to boil the water and then let it sit for 5 minutes. So starting with possibly one of the most well-known green teas out there, it is gunpowder tea. And this is a Chinese green tea, and it is rolled into little balls, which is why it's called gunpowder, because that supposedly looks like gunpowder. So you can see the leaves unfurl when they have been steeped. But it's a popular drink worldwide. The flavor, of course, will vary according to where it was grown and what production was used, but it is a pretty classic green tea flavor. It's a little bit bitter and a little bit astringent, but certainly not overpoweringly so. It has a lovely golden color to it and a very nice scent. It is not my favorite green tea. Personally, I like a lighter tea, but it is certainly a very nice tea. And it is steeped for about 1 minute. And you can generally use about 1 teaspoon of loose leaf tea per 6 ounces of water. You can definitely vary the amount of tea depending on your preference. I tend to brew a rather stronger cup of tea based on the volume of leaves that I use rather than the amount of time that I steep it for. So certainly play around for your preference, but starting at 1 teaspoon per 6 ounces of water is a good place to start. Next up, we have sencha green tea, which is in Japanese green tea. It's processed by steaming. It is the most popular tea in Japan. It makes up about 80% of the country's tea production. It is a much lighter tea than the gunpowder. It is far less bitter and far less astringent. It has a very nice light green color. And the flavor I would describe as slightly of the sea. It's not salty, of course, but it has that fresh, well, slightly perhaps seaweed-like flavor, but I don't want to turn you off. It doesn't actually taste like seaweed, but it's reminiscent of that. It's quite a lovely drink. That one is also steeped for a minute. Next, we have hojicha green tea, which is another Japanese tea. It is roasted. So this is roasted over charcoal. It uses bancha or kukicha tea, which we'll talk about later. And it has this really lovely nutty, roasty, toasty flavor to it, as well as the aroma is very roasty. roasty, is that a word? I'm going with it, roasty. It was actually, the process was developed pretty recently in the 1920s, but it has become very popular in Japan and outside of Japan. One moment. Letting somebody in. So this one, you're going to want to steep it between 30 seconds and 3 minutes. So there's some variation there. And it's really just a matter of preference for how strong you want the flavor. If you are not already a hojicha drinker, I recommend starting at the 30-second mark and then working your way up to 3 minutes over different brews, so you can find your own personal preference. Next up, we have Bancha green tea, which is another Japanese green tea. Are you seeing a pattern here? I like Japanese green tea. It is harvested from the second flush of sencha between summer and autumn. So the type of tea and the flavor of the tea can greatly depend on several different things, such as when it was harvested, what time of year, whether or not it was shipped. So there's a lot of variation there. It's even more mild than the sencha. I really usually drink on a daily basis, besides sencha and jasmine. So this is definitely one of my definite favorites. But as you can see, it's got a very white, light hue to it. It is also steeped for 1 minute. Oh, by the way, all of the teas that we are talking about in this class, with one exception, that was one that I just had hanging around the house, are all teas that you can buy at the co-op. And they are either in the bulk section or in the grocery department. Only 2 of the teas are ones that we don't carry in bulk. There's certainly a lot of other kinds of tea out there in the world, but we have a really nice base for getting started. We would have to have literally the entire store full of tea if we were going to carry everything. But next up, we have matcha green tea, which is actually originates in China, but it is probably better known as a Japanese tea because it is the tea that they use for tea ceremony. And also there's a lot of Japanese confections that are made with matcha powder. So this is a stone ground powder that is made from tencha leaves. Tencha is a type of tea in Japan that is the highest quality green tea pretty much. And as I said, it's used in the Japanese tea ceremony, but it is also used for recreational drinking and for baking. And in the West, and also in Japan, but in the West, we probably know it best for the matcha latte, which has been, of course, picked up by some very trendy places. So the thing about matcha is that it is wonderfully strong. It's a concentrated green tea, so it has a really strong flavor. It has a lovely grass green color. It has actually a very grassy flavor. It's very nice, concentrated green tea flavor, but not at all bitter or astringent. And when you brew it in the traditional method, you get a lovely foam on the top, which really adds to the experience of drinking it. As far as that traditional method goes, we will actually be showing you a video of how to do it. And there are instructions in the packet that I gave you. But it is something that requires a couple of special pieces of equipment, for lack of a better word. But you're just going to need a small bowl, like a rice bowl sized bowl. And it is actually good to have one that is specifically made for it because the shape of it can really affect how easy it is to get that lovely froth on the top. Froth, that's not an easy word. But you can use a regular small bowl if you want. But the most important thing to have is actually the bamboo whisk that is for whisking up the matcha. It makes a big difference. You can buy these things pretty easily online. I also happen to sell them. I have some left over from the store. So if you are interested in getting some matcha equipment, you can definitely email me. Just to plug myself there. And we're actually going to be doing some recipes later that use matcha for an ingredient in baking. So that's another way that you can use matcha. Because it's a concentrated tea, it really, it has higher caffeine, but it also has higher antioxidants and stuff. So it is definitely becoming a very popular health drink. Oh, and at the Co-op Cafe, you can actually get the green drink. Actually, you can put it in any of your drinks, but I like to get the green drink, which is our smoothie that's made with different green things. And I have them put matcha in it, and it really adds to the flavor. It's quite lovely. Highly recommend. Next up, we have kukicha, which is not technically a green tea, but I put it in the green tea section because I couldn't really figure out where to put it otherwise. And it is actually a twig tea. So that means that it is made, as you can see in that picture, with the twigs and stems of the tea plant. So this is a popular tea in Japan. It has a taste between gyokuro and sencha, but if you haven't tried either of those teas, that's not particularly helpful to you. So I will tell you that it is a very woodsy, earthy tea. It definitely has, it's almost like a roasted tea, but it is more earthy than that. It's quite nice, and it has a lovely smell to it. And because it's made of the twigs, I believe it is a much lower caffeine level. So it's quite popular for people who like something a bit stronger and more full-bodied, but don't want the caffeine added in there. So this one is another 1 minute steep. And it is common to drink this one with 3 or 4 infusions of from the same twigs. So what that means is it's pretty common for a lot of different teas to re-steep the same leaves or twigs, as it were, multiple times. So you'll drink the first cup, and then you'll pour the more liquid over the same leaves or twigs, and repeat that 3 or 4 times. And it really changes the flavor with each iteration of it. The flavor usually gets a little bit stronger, or I guess more bitter in a lot of cases, but like, you know, some people really like that stronger, more bitter flavor. So this is one that's pretty common to do that with. So moving on to black tea. Black tea is wilted, sometimes crushed, and fully oxidized. So it is a more processed variety of tea than green tea. It has the strongest flavor of all the varieties and has the highest caffeine levels. So it's more on par with, say, a coffee, although I don't really like to compare coffee and tea. It's pretty common to drink black tea with either milk or a sweetener like sugar or honey, whereas you don't so much do that with the green tea. So it's a nice, it's nice by itself. It's nice mixed with cream and sugar. So there's a lot of variation therein. With black teas, I generally like to use a water that has just come off of a boil. So green tea, you wait 5 minutes so it has a chance to cool down. Black tea, you're not going to damage the flavor by using a hotter water. So you can use that pretty much right off of a boil. In fact, usually with black tea, the hotter the water, the stronger the flavor that you get. So it's good to do that. So starting with the Darjeeling, this is a tea that is grown in the Darjeeling region of India. It's considered one of the highest quality black teas, and the leaves are harvested the tea is harvested by plucking the plant's top 2 leaves and buds from March to November, which is a pretty wide time span there, but that time span is divided into 4 flushes. You're going to want to brew this one for 3 to 4 minutes, depending on how strong you want it. And Darjeeling is one of those teas that is really versatile as far as how you want to drink it. You can have it with milk and you can have it with sugar, but by itself, it's got a really nice full-bodied flavor, so you don't really need to accompany it with anything. Although it does go rather nicely with chocolate, as we will learn later. I see I have a question here, but I see that it also got answered, so, but I am keeping an eye on it, so if anybody has any questions, definitely feel free to chat. So next we have Assam black tea, which is another Indian tea, this one grown in the Assam region. It is brisk and malty with a bright color. It's a more flavorful tea than the Darjeeling. Assam teas or the blends are often sold as breakfast teas. So you'll hear that term often, and we're going to talk about some of the different breakfast teas, but it is a tea that is often used in blends, and it's also used for like chai, or karak is usually made with an Assam tea. This is another 3 to 4 minute brew. Next we have, I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce that, but I'm going to go with Lapsang Souchong, which is a black tea from China, and it is smoked. And boy, is it smoked. It is like liquid smoke. It has a very smoky flavor and smell. It is smoked over pine fire, so it has definitely that pine flavor translates into this tea. When you brew this tea, it smells like a combination of pine and leather. It's got a lot of nose to it. So if you like smoky flavors, you will definitely like that. It's kind of similar to, if you've ever had it, a Russian smoked tea, but it's a little bit different, the flavor. But it's quite nice. I personally am not a huge fan of smoked things, but if you like smoked things, I think you'll like it. This is a 2 to 3 minute brew. Next up, we have English breakfast, which, as mentioned before, is a blend that uses Assam, but it also uses a Ceylon tea and a Kenya tea, most commonly. This is probably the most popular blended tea for British and Irish tea culture. And it is also usually served either with milk or with lemon, not both, but one or the other. This is a 2 to 3 minute brew, and it's got a very nice full flavor, but it's a little bit more mild than the next one that we're going to talk about. But it definitely goes very well with a breakfast. Next up, we have the Irish breakfast black tea, which is a blend of black teas, this time mostly a combination of Assam and Ceylon. And this one is a lot stronger than the English breakfast, and it has a very strong malty component to it. Because it's so strong, it's usually drunk with milk and sugar if you like sweet things. But it's a little bit darker tea, and it has that stronger full-bodied flavor, so it's quite nice. Both English breakfast and Irish breakfast tend to be a pretty small powder, not powder of course, but a small, the leaves are crushed up more, so you're going to want a finer strain on it if you're when you're brewing it. So then just briefly, I'm going to talk about white tea, oolong, and pu'er, which we do not sell a ton of varieties of at the co-op, but we do have a couple of them, except for the pu'er. So the white tea is a minimally processed, mild flavored, and low caffeinated tea. As you can see from that picture, it's the one on the left. It's practically a whole leaf. So very little is done to tamper with it. And it also has a very light color when it's brewed, and it's extremely mild, but it's quite lovely. And this one here is actually White Pony, which is a variety that we sell in the grocery department from Red Cup, which is a local company that imports organic fair trade tea from China. So it's a pretty cool company, and they have some really nice teas. They actually have a bunch of different Chinese black teas that are also quite good. So then we have oolong tea, which is wilted, bruised, and partially oxidized. It's a little bit closer to a black tea, but it's not quite as strong. And we actually sell that in the grocery department from, I think they're Choice, and it's a tea bag that we have, but it's still quite good. And then I just wanted to mention Pu'er, which we do not currently sell at the co-op, but I had some at the house, so I brewed some up for this picture. And it's actually a fermented tea, and it has a mildly, what I would call sea-like flavor. And it's sort of reminiscent of a mix between a green and a black tea. So it's definitely an interesting and unique flavor. And then these are mixed teas. Well, I call them mixed teas. I'm not really sure if that's the proper term for them, but these are teas that have tea leaves, but then they also have another component that changes the flavor on them. So for that, we have jasmine tea, which is my favorite tea pretty much. I pretty much start every single day with a cup of jasmine tea. So what that is actually a green tea usually, and it's scented with jasmine blossoms, or sometimes it contains the actual blossoms. So it has this really lovely floral taste. It is great hot. It's also really good iced, and it's also very nice for cooking with because that flavor is so subtly floral, and it has a slight sweetness to it, even though it's not an actual sugar, but it's reminiscent of that. It's quite lovely. Next up is Earl Grey, which is generally made with black tea that has been flavored with the oil of the bergamot orange. So it also has a lovely floral flavor to it, but it is black tea, so it's a little bit stronger. They used to make this more with China black teas, but now they have started making it more with Ceylon teas instead, because people are more apt to drink it with milk these days. So Ceylon teas apparently work better for milk than the China black teas. So next is chai tea, which is a black tea, usually Assam, that's mixed with a blend of spices. We'll be talking about this specifically later, so I won't get into it super at this point. Then last of all, we have Genmaicha, which is a green tea with roasted rice kernels in it. So it has this really wonderful nutty flavor to it. It smells and a little bit tastes very much like popcorn. It's quite interesting. And we're gonna also be cooking something with that later. Also, honorable mention, I guess, is Moroccan mint, which is actually green tea mixed with mint leaves, which is also quite good. So now we're moving into the recipe, or not recipe, but the demo section of the class. So this part here is just about brewing teas. So when you are brewing tea, and in this class, mostly I've been talking about loose leaf teas. Of course, there are bagged teas, which are more popular in America. Personally, I prefer loose leaf tea because it's usually higher quality, and also when they make tea for the bags, they tend to crush the leaves more so that they don't expand as much in the bags, which sort of changes the flavor and the quality. So it's nice to do loose leaf generally. I certainly am not going to judge you if you stick to bagged tea. In fact, I will recommend that if you're going to use bagged tea, that you use the Equal Exchange tea that we carry at the co-op, because they are a really cool company. For one thing, they're also a cooperative, and their teas are fair trade and they're very high quality. So even though they're a bag tea, you're not really losing the quality. In fact, the jasmine tea that I drink pretty much daily is their bagged tea. So that's that. But if you are using loose leaf tea, you are going to need something to strain the tea leaves out so you don't have a mouthful of leaves. So you can use a strainer for this. You can use a little tea pinchy spoon. I don't know what those are actually called, or a tea ball. You can get any of those at the co-op, or you can use a vessel that has a built-in strainer of some sort. So in this picture here, we have a cup that has a porcelain basket as part of it, and it also has a lid so you can keep your tea hot. You can use a French press. My glass kettle over here, teapot, has a lovely metal basket that hangs from it that you can take out. So you can steep it right in there. And you can't really tell from the picture, but that little teapot in the background is one of the ones that has a barrier between the spout and the body that has a couple little holes drilled in it. So that's not great if you have a really powdery tea, like a breakfast blend, but it works well if you have something with bigger leaves or like a kukicha with the twigs. So you have some different options there. And now we have a video of the actual process of brewing tea for a little teacup here. And got a little strainer basket and about a teaspoon of loose leaf tea. This is an Irish breakfast. This is hot water that just came off of a boil. And you pour it over the leaves as such. And then I like to give it a little up and down dunk to mix it in a little bit. And this was a 3-minute brew on this one. There's a little jump skip here, but that was 3 minutes. And then you take it out. You can see you've got a lovely color now. And then with the Irish breakfast, generally you have it with a little sweetener. That's monk fruit sweetener and a little bit of milk or half and half, as the case may be. And this is very important, but when you're adding milk to tea, you always add it after you have already steeped the tea and taken the leaves out. If you add the milk before that, you are going to drastically reduce the temperature of your water, which will make it so that it doesn't really steep properly. You will end up with a much weaker tea. But you can also cold brew your tea. So hot brewing, of course, is where you use water that's either just boiled or boiled recently. And it's a very quick process. Cold brewed tea takes quite a while, and you use cold water for it. That then sits with the leaves in it for usually a few hours to overnight. I really like to cold brew my tea. For one thing, it is very nice mild tea, and for another, it has about half the caffeine that a hot tea does, which is great for me because I don't do great with tons of caffeine, so I can enjoy more tea for less caffeine. But as you can see, there's a real difference in the color between these two. The one on the left, of course, is the hot brewed, and it's got a nice dark green color, and the one on the right is the cold brew that was steeped for about 8 hours, and it has that lovely light green color. So it's definitely not as strong a brew, but also even though it's steeping for such a long time, it doesn't get any of the bitterness or astringency that you can get if you say left your tea leaves in a hot brew for that amount of time. So that's another option. I have that glass teapot, and I just like to put the leaves in it before I go to bed, fill it up with cold water, and then first thing in the morning I have some lovely tea, which is great for me. I like to drink my tea cold or room temperature or iced or hot. I'm open to anything. So next we're going to talk about chai tea, and I'm not going to teach you how to make chai tea from scratch from all the different spices, because we actually carry a really lovely chai blend in the bulk department that is from a local company called Chaiwala of Maine. And so that's what we used for this following recipe. And so the chai tea, as discussed earlier, is a blend made with Assam black tea usually, and a bunch of different spices. So generally it starts with a base of ginger and cardamom, and then you might see other spices add to it, one or more of cinnamon, star anise, fennel seeds, peppercorn, nutmeg, and cloves. And occasionally you will see an addition depending on the region or the preference. It might have chili or mace or coriander or allspice or cloves, or rarely, but sometimes rose or licorice. So it's a very blended, spicy, lovely to drink on a cold day sort of tea. So we're going to play a video here for how to properly brew from this mix here. So you're going to add the tea into a pot. That was about, I think, 1 cup of water and 1.5 cups of milk. You can also use an almond milk or soy milk. Going to bring it to a almost boil and then let it steep for 5 minutes and then strain it. And you can also top it with a little bit of cinnamon, which is in the picture that we had earlier, what happened. You can brew chai tea without any milk. It is traditionally done with milk, but you can also just do it with water. And certainly, as I mentioned, you can do it with almond milk as well, or whatever your dairy alternative preference is. Next up, we have karak tea, which is a sweet spiced tea, very similar to chai. It originated in India, but it is really popular throughout the Middle East, especially in Saudi Arabia. And it is a very sweet, slightly thicker spiced tea made with Assam. My sister Sahia was kind enough to make this karak for me while I feverishly finished prepping for this class because I ran out of time. So shout out to Sahia for making that possible. So we're going to start with 4 cups of water. This makes quite a lot of karak. And then you're going to use 1 tin of evaporated milk or condensed milk. Condensed milk, of course, has sweetener in it. Evaporated milk does not. And then you're going to use a blend of spices, cinnamon, cloves, both powdered, and then some star anise, and some cardamom pods. Those will be whole. I feel like this would be a nice thing to have for Christmas, nice and spiced. And then you're going to put all these things into the pot, and you're going to turn the heat up to medium-high, and you're going to cook it until it is just starting to boil, which is where you have little bubbles around the edges. And then you're going to turn it down and continue to stir until the spices are blended in so they're no longer sitting on the top. And it's going to be a slightly golden brown color, although it's not going to be super golden brown. And then once that is done, you're going to put in the Assam leaves and stir them in. And you're going to let them sit for 60 minutes or overnight if you want it. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. You're going to, beg pardon, one moment. Whoops. You're going to let the spices sit for 60 minutes without the tea after they have cooked. Then you're going to add the tea, bring it back up to a almost boil, and then you're going to let the tea sit for about 10 minutes. And then after that, sorry, since I didn't make this tea, I'm not as not remembering the recipe as well. She is on this class though, so if you have questions, she can answer them. So then once it has brewed for about 10 minutes, you will add in your sweetener, some honey or some sugar. This is traditionally a very sweet tea, so you can change the variation of sweetness to your preference, but generally you would do it quite sweet. And dissolve your honey or sugar into it. And then you're going to strain it once that is done. and you will serve it hot. And of course, since this makes such a large recipe, if you don't have that many people around, you can certainly put it in your fridge strained and reheat it when wanted. So that is karak. Next up, we have Japanese royal tea, which is a milky cafe drink, and it's either served hot or cold. It's made with both Darjeeling, or it can either be with both or one or the other, of Darjeeling, Assam, and Ceylon tea. It's kind of like chai without the spice. First, you're going to take your tea leaves and add a little hot water to it, but just enough to cover, and you're going to let it bloom. Then you're going to bring your water and your milk to a just before boiling. And in case you don't know, if you're using milk, you don't want it to boil because it can separate. So you want it to just be about to boil. Add your leaves back in. Stir it in there. And then you're going to turn off the heat and let it sit for, it was either 5 or 10 minutes. I think it was 5 minutes. And then you are going to strain it. And if you're serving it hot, you can have it just as is, or you can put it in the fridge and bring it down to a chill and then put it on ice. And it's mildly sweet. Oh yeah, you put the, I'm not sure if it showed it, but when it's still hot, you add in your sugar if you would like it to be sweet. So it's got this really nice, mild black tea flavor, and it's nice and creamy. Next is Thai iced tea, which you may have seen before. It's quite trendy right now. And this is a sweet, milky iced tea, and it's made with Ceylon tea. Now, we currently do not have Ceylon tea at the co-op, but we're actually getting it in. I'm very excited. So it should arrive in the bulk department sometime next week, I'm thinking. So I just made it ahead of time so you can see what can be done with it. And you can make Thai iced tea either with condensed milk, or you can use coconut milk. I used coconut milk for this, so it was also vegan. So you're gonna start by making your Ceylon tea with a nice hot water. Ceylon tea is a type of black tea, so you will use having just boiled. And you want to make it a nice strong brew. So brew it on the more 3 or 4 minutes side of things. See that lovely red color? Then you're going to want to add your sweetener to it. And this is designed to be a sweeter tea, so you can definitely add as much sweetness as you want without feeling too guilty. Then you're going to let it brew. You're going to let it cool down, either in the fridge or just leaving it out. And then you're going to put it over ice and pour your condensed milk or your coconut milk over the top of it. And that's where you get that lovely variation in tone. Next up is matcha tea. As promised, this is the traditional brewing method. This was another one that my sister graciously volunteered for because she admittedly makes a much nicer cup of matcha than I do. So this is the powdered green tea from Japan, made from the tencha leaves. Again, you're going to want a small bowl and a teacup for this, and a little scoop, and a matcha whisk. The matcha whisk is the only thing out of that you will want to have specialized, but it is good to have all of those things as well. So first, you're going to want to heat up your cup with some hot water. You would like the cup to not cool down your water while you're working with it, because you want it to remain nice and hot. This is again a water that was boiled and then sat for 5 minutes. And then you're going to add in about a half a teaspoon of matcha, and then maybe 2 tablespoons of hot water. And then the motion that you want to make with the whisk is a zigzag. And part of this is sped up. I had that beginning part not sped up so you can see what it looks like, but then this part is sped up, so you don't have to go quite this rapidly. But as you can see, there's already a foam collecting on the top, which is what you want. A lovely froth. And once you have a nice foam going, gosh, I wonder if it might look a little choppy to you if your internet is not as good as desired. So then you're going to add a little bit more hot water, and pretty much you're going to repeat this process until you have about half of the bowl filled, or about your teacup's worth filled. And as you go, more and more froth should collect along the top of your matcha. Isn't the color lovely? And it takes roughly a minute and a half to make a cup of matcha. It's amazing how the froth doesn't dissipate. If you do it right, it sticks around for quite a while. While I was taking pictures of it, I had it sitting around for about 10-15 minutes and it hadn't dissipated. So, and there you have it, a lovely cup of matcha tea. So now we're going to move on to the cooking portion of the class. And we're going to start with recipes that use an infused tea. So that is where you make, you take the liquid of your recipe, like milk or cream, and you steep it with leaves in it to infuse the flavor, and then you strain it before putting it in the recipe. So you get a nice strong flavor with this method, and there's no need to adjust the amount of liquid for the recipe. And also there's no alteration in texture, which is quite nice. So we're going to start this with an Earl Grey ice cream. And this is something you're going to need an ice cream maker for, which is a lovely thing to have. And it's really nice, creamy, sweet, and then that floral flavor from the Earl Grey really carries over. It's quite lovely. So you're going to use 1.5 cups of milk. You're going to use about 3 tablespoons of loose Earl Grey tea. You're going to need 2/3 of a cup of sugar. And you can use cornstarch, but I like to use potato starch, 2 tablespoons, an 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, 3 large egg yolks, a tisp of vanilla extract, and about 1.5 cups of heavy cream. It's a very creamy, lovely ice cream. So first you're going to start with your milk, and you're going to bring it up to an almost boil, and add your leaves. I guess you add your leaves before it gets to the boil. So you're going to bring that to an almost boil. And then you're going to take the heat off, and you're going to let it steep while you work on the other part of your recipe. So you're going to separate your eggs, and you just want the yolks, because we're actually making a custard for this. So that's part of what gives it that lovely creaminess. And then you're going to add your sugar to the eggs. You can vary the amount of sugar that you use, but it'll affect how hard your ice cream freezes. So it's good to use the full amount. And then you add the starch, and you're going to whisk these things together. And then you're going to add a little bit of the heavy cream to this, so that it, and then mix it in so it gets to be a lovely loose batter, I guess. I don't really know what to call that. So then you're going to strain your tea. And you're going to want to press the leaves so that you get all of the flavor out of them. I mean, you know, just the flavorful milk. Nothing wasted. And you're going to want to bring, you might have lost some of your volume, so you're just going to want to add a little bit more milk so that you're sure that it's the same volume. And then you're going to add it to your eggs, but be sure you are whisking while you do this because you're adding a warm milk to it and you don't want to cook your egg yolks by accident. So just whisk away as you add that in there. And then you're going to take this and put it into a pot over medium heat. I used a candy thermometer here to keep an eye on the temperature. You're going to want it to get to about 160 degrees, and it will thicken while you do that. So you're going to want to stir it constantly or you're going to get it stuck to the bottom of your pan. And actually, I suggest not using a whisk because I had some stickage in the corner that I couldn't quite get with my whisk. But as you can see, it's thickened up here. This takes about 5 minutes. This is obviously sped up, but you're going to have a nice thick thing, and then you're going to add your cream to it and remove it from the heat. And taste it, obviously. And then you're going to want to strain it so that you have a really smooth custard. And you're going to take this custard and you're going to put it in the refrigerator for 8 hours or overnight. So if this is something that you're serving for dinner, you're definitely going to want to make sure that you give yourself time to do this. So you're going to want to do it probably the day before, because it also has to sit after it goes in the ice cream maker. So then use the settings of your ice cream maker, but it's generally about 20 minutes in the ice cream maker. The ice cream maker usually has a bowl that you freeze overnight, so you can put it in at the same time as your custard. And that's after about 20 minutes of ice creaming. And when it comes out of the ice cream maker, it's going to be sort of the consistency of a slightly melted soft serve ice cream. And so you are going to transfer it from the freezer bowl into an airtight container, like a Tupperware container. Or if you've saved a container from the last time you had ice cream, you can also use that. I don't recommend using a glass container because the glass gets too cold and it can make your ice cream really hard. The greatest part about this is that after you're done, you can scrape the edges and eat it. I made this ice cream with monk fruit instead of, actually all of these recipes, but the ice cream, I mean, I didn't eat the whole container myself, but me and several other people ate it pretty quickly. So that is the Earl Grey ice cream. Next up, we're going to talk about the Darjeeling Cocoa Cheesecake. So this is a really nice combination of Darjeeling and chocolate. Although I call it cocoa and not chocolate because you want to make it mildly chocolate flavored. You don't want the chocolate to overpower the flavor. So this uses 32 ounces, that's very important. 1 cup of sugar, or if you're using monk fruit, I actually used a half a cup of sugar. 2 tablespoons of potato starch, 4 large eggs, also good if they're at room temperature. You want half a cup of heavy cream, which is what we're going to infuse. And you want 1 tablespoon of Darjeeling loose leaf tea leaves and 2 tablespoons of cocoa powder. So first we're going to start by infusing our cream. So it's a half a cup. And turn it on to a medium heat. And you're going to add in your tea leaves, stir it up, and you're going to bring it to a just before boiling. Turn off the heat, and you're going to let that sit for about 5 minutes. That's your cream cheese. I'm going to strain it, and you're going to and then your cocoa, so that you don't get any clumps. And use a spoon to get the last of the clumps out of the sieve. And then you're going to add in your eggs. I think I forgot to, and you're going to use a hand. And you're going to want it to be a lovely creamy texture, smooth and creamy. Oh, and by the way, I pretty much never make my cheesecakes with a crust. I make a crustless cheesecake, but if you want to make a crust for it, certainly it's pretty easy to figure out how to do that. It's just crumbly cookies and butter. And I would recommend using a chocolate cookie if you want to do that. To making them without, I don't eat sugar, so it's hard to find someone who can't have grains and to enjoy the cheesecake together. It has to be crustless. So then you're going to add this to a springform pan, either bare or with a crust. You can also do this in a casserole dish if you want bars instead of cake. And then you're going to bake it at 350 for about 35 minutes, I believe, until it is set. And if you have a larger oven than me, you can put it in a water bath where you have a larger container underneath it with water in it. You know, with it sitting in the water. And that actually helps it keep cracking, which I had some cracks around the edge of your springform egg, the cheesecake. Next in our list of infused recipes, we have the Earl Grey Bundt cake. And this is a really lovely accompaniment to an afternoon tea party. Hint, hint. So that is going to use half a cup of butter at room temperature, 1 cup of sugar, 2 eggs at room temperature. And actually, when I made this recipe, you may notice that neither of those things were at room temperature, and the way it worked, it would have been much nicer if they were room temperature. You're going to want half a teaspoon of vanilla, 2 cups of flour, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, 1 cup of infused. This one actually I use. Then you can use icing and turn the heat on, medium. Bring it to an almost boil. Is this starting to sound familiar? Turn the heat off. Add in your Earl Grey tea bags, or you can totally use loosely for this. Just use bags for this one, so you could see using bags. And make sure that they're fully submerged, and let them sit for about 5 minutes, or possibly 10 minutes. All of these times are in the recipe packet that I gave bags. And then you're going to take your room and cream the butter. You can use a handheld mixer for this, or you can use a standing mixer like this. You're going to cream your butter, then you're going to add in your eggs. And this is where it's good if both of those things are room temperature, because otherwise the eggs and the butter tends to not mix together as well. It looks kind of chunky. Which is all your dry ingredients together. And then you're going to use half of your infused milk and beat it. And you're going to repeat that process until you've used all of your dry ingredients and all of your milk. And you're going to get a lovely thick batter, and it does have a nice Earl Grey scent to it. And you're going to prepare your bundt pan with some butter, and then you're going to put a little flour in it and tap it around so that the flour coats the butter. before this happened. We're still mixing on the video, but that is something that you will want to do. Batter. My stomach just made the loudest noise. So then you're definitely going to want to make sure to scrape down the edges, that you just make sure that you get everything into the batter. And then you can taste the batter off of the spatula. And you're going to add that into your bundt pan that was prepared as described. I like a bundt pan. If you're a heathen like me. And you're going to put that in the oven. The cook time is in the packet. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I think it's about 30 minutes. And you just want to, oh, and the temperature was 350. And you're just going to want to cook it until, if you insert a butter knife into it, it comes out clean. Or if you poke it, it has that nice little spring to it. And then it is the bundt cake. Next up in our powdered teas. So this is either where you use a powdered tea like matcha, or if you grind the teas yourself, you can use a coffee grinder for this, or you can use a spice mill. So this works well for recipes with less liquid in them, because there's more to work with. A range of uses, and you get a lot of really nice feedback, is that for teas other than matcha, if you grind them, they can have a slightly gritty flavor, which is less than ideal. But as long as you grind them up well, you shouldn't have that problem. So first off, we're going to do a chai scone. And this is actually a scone recipe that I have been making for the better part of a decade. I learned how to do it at my first job, and you can use this basic recipe spices for any flavor scone you want. You can add in fruit or different whole recipe. Excuse me. So it's 2 cups of flour, a 1/4 cup of sugar, and a teaspoon of salt. I don't know why they're all jumbled together like that, but then you're going to want a tablespoon of baking powder, 1 tablespoon of Assam tea leaves that have been ground up, and then you're going to want 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, ground ginger, cardamom, and black pepper. Or you can look at that list of different spices that go in chai, and you can use the combination that you like best. I do like to have a little black pepper in there, though, because it really gives it that unique to a sweet thing. And then you can use enough heavy cream, but you want to make sure that you do not make it too. And special equipment for this is just a coffee grinder or a spice mill. I used my mom's coffee grinder and cleaned it out real nice so that there wasn't any coffee left. And so you're going to want to grind up your tea into a fine powder. The finer, the better. Not fine enough. Still not fine enough. Not fine. And then you're going to want to add it to your mixed together your flour. Then add your baking powder as well. Actually use one fruit, of course, but brown sugar is, if you're going to use sugar, I'd recommend you use brown sugar. Then you're going to add in your cream, and you're going to want to do it a little bit at a time until it just sticks together. I had the cream from one container in this, what was left in my container in that And then I had another container on standby. A little bit more together because it gets quite, also that's like the world's tiniest spoon. Honestly, I use my hands for a lot of things. You're going to want to stick it all together, and then you're going to want to have a floured surface. You're going to put your dough down and cover both sides so that it's nice and dry. And then you're going to cut it into, sorry, that's about a 2-inch high circle. And you're going to cut it into about 8 wedges. And then you're going to put, I actually realized after I was done doing this, I have a teeny tiny little convection oven, so I always have a hard time finding pans that are the right size. But mine got a little squished together in this tart pan. But you're going to cook it at 350 for about 35 minutes until the tops are golden brown. And then optional, you can make a, what do you call it, a glaze with confectioner sugar and a little cream, and just glaze the tops of these. Next up, we have matcha melt in your mouth cookies. This is actually that I got from a Japanese website. With matcha, I'll split the recipe into 3, and I make 1 batch matcha, 1 with cocoa in it, and then 1 with vanilla extract, so you get a lovely 3-color range. But also, the matcha ones are pretty much the best ones, so you can make a whole batch that way. So you're going to use, this is actually one that you're going to need a kitchen scale for, because it's all pretty precise for measurements. So you're going to want 125 grams of butter softened at room temperature, 40 grams of icing sugar sifted, and 25 grams of potatoes. And I used spelt flour for this, so it doesn't really need to be a spoon of matcha powder. Can you hear me resisting the urge to say tisp? So you're going to want to measure all these things out precisely because it will make a difference for the dough. But aside from having to measure everything out, this is a really easy cookie to make, and it doesn't take long at all. And you get a lot of cookies out of this one batch. Also, you'll notice that it is mostly made with potato starch, and I haven't tried this, but I have a pretty strong theory that you could replace the cake flour with rice flour if you wanted to do a gluten-free variation of this. And also, I used, instead of regular icing sugar, I used the Swerve sweetener, which is made from erythritol, which is a sugar alcohol. So that also worked just fine. Oh, wait. I forgot I had a little video here for you of breaking open a cookie, and then I ate half of it. But it's got a really nice crumbly texture, and it really does melt in your mouth. So you're gonna start with whipping up your butter and your powdered sugar. You're going to want to do this in this creamed consistency. Then you're going to add in all of your dry ingredients, and you're going to sift them in. This batter is, this dough is the type of dough where you are like, it's not going to come together, it's not going to stick, until it does. So don't get discouraged and add in more liquid or anything, because it will stick together. So I just used the blender to get it to about where it looks like you're about to make pie dough. A little dry ball together, sort of. And eventually, you will end up with a really nice dry cookie dough with a lovely green hue. It almost looks like you're making something that's pistachio flavored. You don't want to use too much matcha in this, just a nice light flavor. And then you're going to use a spoon, and it's about a tablespoon or a tablespoon and a half. Roll it up into a ball with your hand. You can also chill it for about 15 minutes in the fridge. And then you're going to take a fork and just press your balls, press them down. You can also wet the fork so that it doesn't stick quite so much. And you're going to bake those at 350 for about 15 to 30 minutes, depending on your oven. But they will just start to have gotten a little bit brown on the top when they're done. And they're very delicate when they're first coming out of the oven, so you want to be really careful when you're removing them from the pan. And then so Swiss rolls are a very popular dessert in Japan, and the matcha one is a really fun variation of it. And I actually used a recipe for this from justonecookbook.com, which is a blog that I follow of Japanese recipes. So you'll notice in your recipe packet that I didn't write down the recipe. I just directed you to her website because there's no way I could ever explain it better than she does. For the sponge cake, you're going to use 4 large eggs, 3/4 of, I don't want to use pastry flour for this, a ounce of matcha, and a half a cup to warm up to touch in the microwave or in a pan. And then the inside is a cream, is a whipped cream, 3/4 of a cup of heavy cream, 1.5 tablespoons of sugar, and then 2 teaspoons of matcha. So first you're going to want to line your pan with parchment paper, and I recommend using a less deep pan than what I use, but this is what I have. You will also notice that the location changed because my oven is not big enough. So I had to go to my aunt's house while she was at church and use her kitchen. Her kitchen is much nicer than my kitchen, so it was actually a lovely treat. So you're going to want to separate your eggs. Put your egg whites into the fridge while you. So you're going to want to use. You're going to sift your dry ingredients way out. You're going to measure. Excuse me. You're going to weigh your ingredients out because you want them to be on the precise side. We have some lovely pastry flour in the bulk section that I used. Nice and precise. And you're going to add your matcha and you're going to add your baking powder. You won't see me add the baking powder because I forgot to and had to add it to one of the last sifts. So you're going to sift this onto the parchment paper. You're mixing together your matcha and you're getting the clumps out of the flour. It's all good. And then you're going to pick the parchment paper up carefully and put it back in your bowl. And then you're going to repeat the process 2 more times. So it's a thrice sifted dry ingredients. I was pretty nervous making this because I'm not really a baker so much as a savory cook. So I was a little nervous about making a sponge cake, but it did come out really nice. And you can put your parchment paper away and you'll use it later. So then you're going to want to put your egg yolks and your sugar into a mixer, and you're going to want to mix these up until you have doubled the size of your yolks, which, yes, if you whip yolks, you will be able to get them double the size. It takes a while, but here you have it. I think it took about 5 minutes maybe. Pretty much you're going to do this until when you pull your whisk up, you get a nice ribbon of yolk that slowly dissipates into the batter when it hits it. So then you're going to put that to the side, and you're going to put your egg yolks into a totally clean bowl that is not wet at all. And you're going to mix it until your egg whites are slightly foamy. And then you're going to add in your sugar in 3 parts. Once you've added in your sugar in 3 parts, you're going to beat the egg whites, excuse me, until stiff peaks form and the top is shiny. Ouch. And then you're going to add in 1/3 of your egg whites into your egg yolk batter, and you're going to gently fold them in using a rubber spatula. This was the part that made me nervous. Sponge cakes are actually a favorite of my family's, but I was never the one making them. So you're going to fold it in, you're going to do it in 1/3, and you're going to fold all of your egg whites into your egg yolks. Gently. Then you're going to add in a little 1/3 of your dry stuff, and fold it in, and then the other 2/3 of it. This is the part where you have to be very delicate with it. And finally, once that's incorporated-ish, you will add in your warm milk, which I had just taken out of the microwave. And you're going to mix that up. And then you're going to put your lovely dough into your prepared pan. And you want to spread it out so that it is evenly spread. I got really messy at this point. I was in a hurry. Okay, so do please forgive me, but I had a slight malfunction while filming, and there is a missing section. So you can find the link packet, and you can see the instructions in the sponge cake at I think it was $3.75 for just 10 minutes until it was just cooked. And then you take it out and you remove it from the pan in such a way that you don't rip it, and you then roll it up with parchment paper in between, in the middle, so that while it's still hot, so that your cake learns to be a roll. And then you let it sit for ½ an hour. Unfortunately, I relocated back to my own kitchen, and it took me a little bit longer than ½ an hour to get to it. So I had a little bit of a crack in my cake. But if you do it within ½ an hour, you should be fine. So now you're making the whipped cream. You got your cream and some sugar, and then you're going to sift in your green tea. I mean your matcha tea. Well, I mean it is green tea, but your matcha tea. And you're going to beat it to a lovely whipped cream. In color to it. And actually I had some leftovers, and my sister ate some with some blueberries, and she said it was really lovely. So then you're going to take your rolled up Swiss roll that does not have a filling, and you're going to carefully unroll it. So this is where I had a little bit of some cracks, which ought to not happen if you didn't let it sit for too long. I think mine sat for about an hour. Then you're going to take your whipped cream and you're going to spread it in the center, or spread it across the top of your cake. And you can spread it a little bit thinner on the end that isn't as curly, because it'll kind of push out that direction as you roll. So then you're going to carefully roll it back up with the whipped cream in the center. Then you're going to take your parchment paper and you're going to roll it up like a Tootsie Roll. And from there, you're going to put it into the fridge for 4 hours. This is another one that you will probably want to make the day before if you're planning on serving it for a dinner party. When it's been when it's done sitting in the refrigerator for 4 hours, you can take it out and you can just carefully, with a serrated blade, slice off the ends of the cake so that you have a nice roll to show off. And also you can eat those ends. Ta-da! And I dusted it with some matcha to give it a lovely, lovely garnish. And that is your Swiss roll. And for our last 3 recipes, we have brewed tea. So this is where you brew some tea with some hot water, the same way you would for drinking it, perhaps a little stronger. And then you use this tea in your recipes. This works best for when you're cooking something in the tea. So for like poaching things, which is one of the recipes we're gonna do, or for recipes with a lot of liquid. But it's a very subtle flavor that you'll be working with. And it doesn't work well for drier recipes, so bear that in mind. In fact, all of these recipes, except for the matcha ones, you're working with a very subtle flavor for your cooking. So bear that in mind. So we're going to start with jasmine poached pears. This uses 3 cups of strongly brewed jasmine tea, 1/3 cup of sugar, and then 1-inch piece of fresh ginger thinly sliced. And then you're going to want 3 ripe but still firm pears. Bosch work really well for this. Mine were just a little bit too not ripe. They took a really long time to cook. It still worked, but you just had to cook away, cook lots and lots. But it would definitely be a little easier if you were working with a riper pear. So to start with, you're going to brew up your tea. And jasmine tea has that really nice floral flavor, and it goes really well with ginger. So actually the other recipe where we use this, we're also going to use some ginger for that. So you're going to steep that tea for about 4 minutes. I mean, sorry, 2 minutes. And you're going to peel your pears and core them. Bosch pear has a really nice, doesn't oxidize a ton, so it's very nice for peeling. And you're gonna core your pears. As you can see, as I struggled to core these pears, they were not ripe. Luckily, pears are pretty good even if they're not ripe. I did injure myself while making these videos, but amazingly, it wasn't while trying to core these pears. I ran my hand through some steam. So once they're all lovely and cored, you're going to chop up your ginger. Chop, chop, chop. And you're going to want to use a pot for this. I ended up using a skillet because it was the one that fit my pears, but I definitely recommend using a stainless steel pot if you have one, because the skillet definitely is not an ideal pan for poaching. You're going to put your ginger in there, and you're going to bring in your sugar, and you're going to bring your tea to a boil. Since this is not milk, you can actually bring it to a boil. And then you're going to put in your pears gently. Don't throw it in like that. And the tea should just barely not cover your pears. And as you cook them, if you're using ripe pears, it should take about 15 minutes. Mine took probably closer to 45. You will every so often spoon some tea over the top of them. And I flipped mine over at one point. And then you want to cook them until they're just tender. And there you have it, poached pears. They're very lovely just by themselves. I also whipped cream at one point. That was pretty good. Great for scones or like muffins or something that's not gonna overpower them. You will use 4 cups of water for this, a half a cup of jasmine tea, 1-inch piece of ginger roughly chopped, 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, and you're going to want 5 teaspoons of Pomona's pectin calcium water, which is where you take a half a teaspoon of the calcium powder that comes in the box and dissolve it in a half a cup of water, and then that's the water that you use for that. And then you're going to want to use 2.5 cups of pure cane sugar and 5 teaspoons of Pomona's pectin powder. This is the one recipe I made where I didn't use fake sugar instead of real sugar, because you're going to want to use real sugar for this. And I tend to get a little stressed when I make jellies about whether or not they're going to set, but I always try to remind myself that if it doesn't set perfectly, you can always use it as a sauce. And I'm guessing that this would make a lovely sauce for a vanilla ice cream. So you're going to mix together your sugar and your pectin so that it's blended. And you're going to bring your water to a boil. Let it sit for, let it boil for, simmer for 5 minutes with the ginger in there. Then remove the heat and put in your leaves and let them steep for, I think it was 10 minutes. And then you're going to strain that. And you're going to want to measure it back out to make sure that you still have 4 cups, add a little water if needs be. And then you're going to bring that to a boil. And then you're going to add your lemon juice and your calcium water. I believe the calcium water acts as a natural preservative. Then you're going to add in your sugar. Oh, sorry, you're going to add your sugar in like 1 cup at a time, or a little less than a cup at a time. And you're going to stir in each go. Remember that sugar has your pectin in it as well. And you might get a little clumpy with some of your pectin, but once you're boiling it away, it should be fine. And once you've got all of your sugar in there, you want to bring it back up to a boil, and then you're going to have it at a hard boil for 2 minutes. While you constantly stir. You constantly stir this. Don't ever stop stirring. And once it's been boiling for 2 minutes, you remove the heat. And you ought to have had a dish in your freezer for this to chill it. And then you take a little bit of the jelly and you put it in for 2 minutes into the freezer, and that's how you test your gel. And if it's not gelled to your satisfaction, you can boil it down a little bit more. So these jars were sterilized in hot boiling water for 5 minutes. Then we're adding the jelly to them, and you're leaving about 1/4 of an inch of space between them and the top. And you're going to want to wipe the edges with a sterilized cloth and put on the lids. And when you screw down the lids, you will want to not screw them all the way. You want them to just be catching. And then you're going to put them back into boiling water. You'll notice some bubbles stream out of them as they seal themselves, or well, not seal themselves, but as they expel their air. And you're going to want them in the boiling water for another 5 minutes, 10 minutes. You're going to want them in for 10 minutes. And then you're going to remove them. And you'll notice that they'll start to pop, the tops of them will pop down, which is showing that they have sealed. And then you're going to want to let them sit at room temperature for about 12 hours before you tighten the screw lids down. And then they should be good to go. This is our final recipe, and it's actually a savory recipe. It's ochazuke, which is a Japanese dish where you take rice with some toppings on it and you pour tea over it. It is lovely. I was a little skeptical when I tried it for the first time, but it is fantastic. And you use the genmaicha for this, which is the green tea with the toasted rice kernels. So it has a really lovely nutty flavor. So for the toppings for this, you can use a variety of different things. But I used 2 Sanjay brown rice crackers that I crushed up. I put them in a little baggie and ran a rolling pin over them. 2 teaspoons of toasted sesame seeds, white sesame seeds, 4 leaves of Italian parsley, or you can use mitsuba if you have it, which is a Japanese parsley sort of. Then it's some nori seaweed that's been cut into strips, about a teaspoon of soy sauce, which is optional, and then a 1/4 cup of shredded roasted salmon. So I actually just took a fillet of salmon and I roasted it in my oven for about 15 minutes, I think it was, with some salt on it. And then I just shredded it up. And then you're going to want 1 teaspoon of genmaicha and about 1 cup of hot water. And as you can see, it was a popular dish as far as the scent went with our puppy. So you're going to use hot, fresh rice for this. This is actually when I burned myself. I was trying to get rice out of my rice maker and I ran my hand through the hot water from the kettle. So you're going to put your tea into a vessel and make it. And you're going to let that steep for about a minute. While it's steeping, you can put your toppings onto your rice. I started with the salmon. This is sockeye Alaskan salmon. You can find it in the freezer section at the co-op. I love salmon. And the rice crackers, which give it a really nice crunchy pop. And toasted sesame seeds, which I toasted myself. And the nori strips. And the parsley leaves. And then you're going to pour your steeped tea over the rice. You're going to want it about halfway full of tea. And then this is optional, but you can add a little bit of soy sauce. I thought the soy sauce accompanied the tea flavor very nicely. And there you have it, Ochazuke. So that is the end of our recipes. And just before you go, I wanted to tell you about the different books that I recommend for further reading. The Tea Enthusiast Handbook is a guide to enjoying the world's best teas. It is a very comprehensive book about all kinds of different tea things. It's by Mary Lou Hayes and Robert J. Hayes. Japanese Tea, A Comprehensive Guide by Simona Zakadekitaite. I don't know how to pronounce that, I'm sorry. She is actually one of the people behind Abubu Tea Farms, which are the farms that I work with for importing Japanese tea. And this is the book that they wrote all about Japanese tea. So if that's an area that interests you, that book is certainly worth a read. If you want to have some fun and do a traditional tea party at some point, Vintage Tea Party by Carolyn Caldecott and Chris Caldecott is a really fun book. Actually, when my sister was pregnant, we threw her a traditional tea party for her baby shower, and it was a lot of fun. We used this book for that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if you're interested in the history of tea, there's a whole section about it in At Home by Bill Bryson. At Home, A Short History of Private Life. And he has a whole bunch of stuff about the history of tea that's really interesting. So actually, the whole book is really interesting, but that part in particular, I am recommending. And then just a short update on our upcoming classes before we sign off. On Thursday, October 15th at 12 p.m., we have Qigong, which is a Chinese movement exercise class. It's kind of similar to Tai Chi, and I'm not teaching that, but I will be filming it. And then more classes from me on Wednesday, October 28th at 4 p.m. We have The Wonderful World of Pumpkins and Squash. I've already got a bunch of recipes underway for that. We're going to have some really amazing, tasty, savory squash and pumpkin dishes for all kinds of different squashes. So if you've been wanting to explore the different kinds of squash, that's a great opportunity. One I'm very excited about, Curries of the World, is going to be Wednesday, November 18th at 4 p.m. I love curries, so we will be exploring curries from all kinds of different corners of the globe where curries are made and specialized. Then on December 9th, Wednesday at 4 p.m., we have traditional holiday foods of the world. So we're going to be exploring some savory foods and some sweet foods from not just Christmas, but a bunch of different winter holidays. That'll be a lot of fun. And then if you're feeling maxed out on sugar after the holiday season, on January 6th at 4 p.m., you can take No Sugar Baking for the new year, where I will teach you all about baking without sugar. As I mentioned, all of the recipes in this, besides the jelly, were all made with sugar alternatives. So it'll be a whole class telling you about the different kinds of sugar alternatives and how to use them in baking, so you can feel good about your New Year resolution. So thank you very much for joining us today. That is all we have. So hope you have a lovely evening and that you will explore some of the wonders of tea. If you want to watch this class again or share it with someone, we will hopefully have it posted at the earliest opportunity tomorrow. So thank you so much, and have a great evening.